Hey, what is going on, everybody? Boilon here, back for another video on Marvel Strike Force. Now, if you watched my vlog video yesterday, then you would have heard that today we're going to be talking in more details about the upcoming Orchis raids, which are going to be launching on Monday. Now, in today's video, we are going to be doing a deep dive on the Mystic and Tech nodes of the Orchis raids. Now, we are not going to be showing gameplay footage. I don't have any of that. But we're going to be taking a look at each of the nodes and what enemies are on the nodes and my thoughts on them and what you're going to have to look out for. So it's going to be really important. We are not going to be talking about mutant, bio, and skill. From my understanding from the people that I've spoke to about this is that it's not that difficult. Maybe it will be at D3, but at least in the beginning, you know, it's going to be very easy for you to sim with the Spider Society, Hive Mind, and Extreme X-Men, and that part really isn't much of a concern for me. So we're going to be focusing primarily on the Tech and Mystic sections, and we're going to be doing this in the good old PowerPoint format because I think that they kind of worked really well for these kinds of videos because it kind of kept me on point as well. So if you're ready to go, everybody, let's boil this down. All right, here we are in my good old PowerPoint presentation here about the Orchis raids. Let's go into the first slide here. So the basics, we're just going to set this up for those of you who don't remember or just need a kind of a refresher. This does have a scaling ISO requirement up to blue 5 by difficulty 3. I believe in the blog it said that there is no requirement actually other than the traits at D0, but it's going to be blue 3, 4, and 5 up to D3. Now, the base stat modifiers for Extreme X-Men, Hive Mind, Spider Society, Orchis, and Night Stalkers do exist. Obviously, we do not have Orchis and Night Stalkers quite yet in the game, but they will be coming soon. Orchis being first, and then Night Stalkers after. Check my other videos on those if you want to know the details of the upcoming teams. There are no buffs for Bifrost or Pegasus, which is going to make the Mystic and Tech sections more challenging, which is why I'm focusing on it in this video. The rewards are just more of the same from Incursion 2, but to give you an example of what's there, at D3 40%, the rewards are 33,000 Red Orb fragments and 3,300 Armory 19 fragments. Now, I think, now don't quote me on this one, but I think for each difficulty, it's about 1 Red Orb more or less, I guess. So like D0, I think would be like 3 orbs less than this. So about 6,000 fragments, I believe. And obviously, there's a bit more of everything else. So everything that you're already getting in Incursion 2 is just a bit more of that. I just wanted to focus on this, which that means it's about 7 red orbs or 1,400 armory fragments more than Incursion 2.3 at 40%. So all this was just kind of labeled at 40, just for those who kind of push for that threshold, I suppose. All of the first-time rewards are at 50% to move up difficulty as well. So I think that Incursion 2 was like 50, 60, 70, or at least that's what I thought it was. And this one, I believe, is just 50 all the way through. Unless that is subject to change, that's highly possible. But the last I heard, it was 50% each. Let's move on to the next slide. So just a refresher again, there is 2 maps. So this raid will have 2 maps for the same raid. Normal will contain less nodes than Omega. Omega will contain more nodes. Normal will have 51 nodes, and Omega has 71, which is equivalent to running Incursion 2 right now. Both of the maps will have difficulty 0 through 3, and the enemies are supposed to be the same difficulty on both maps. Reports, like I said, indicate that mutant skill in bio is to a large extent simmable in the early stages, but probably not at the highest difficulties. So just keep that in mind as well. And also, I do want to say, you know, from what I've heard, is that difficulty 0 has about G16/17 enemies. This is obviously not a problem for the 3 other teams that are getting insane stat buffs. You know, I think it's 60% or something at D0. However, for Bifrost and Pegasus, while that sounds easy, we'll take a look at the nodes and why I think that's going to be challenging for especially Mystic. So let's talk about Mystic, which is naturally these nodes are going to be quite difficult. They're going to be the hardest challenge in Orchis until the release of Night Stalkers team around October. MEPHISTO might be required at higher difficulties, especially on the boss node. We'll take a look at that too. Or a combined effort from multiple players may be needed to knock down this boss node. At the higher difficulties, I think even the standard nodes are going to be quite challenging. But early reports have indicated the D0 regular nodes are not that bad, but the boss is hard even at D0. While at the higher difficulties, again, the regular nodes will get harder. So Mystic is the second section on the left side of the raid map. It is, however, the fourth section of the map on the right side. So, what I would personally recommend is if you have any Mephistos in your alliance, you may want to consider having them on the left side because that's the earliest encounter of the Mystic section, and they will have an easier time doing it than other people. So, whereas on the right hand side of the map, it's on the fourth section. So, if you don't have Mephisto, you can clear a lot more before you potentially get stonewalled by the Mystic section. So, we'll talk about node number 1, and I do have the enemies listed here per wave. Wave 1, I know 100%. Wave 2, some of the nodes might have a third wave or like a small mini wave in between. I don't have that listed, but all of these are the correct enemies listed. So this is node number 1 on the map here. And the first wave contains Nova, Guardian, Sasquatch, Korg, Loki, Sylvie, and Captain Britain. So my first glance at this is obviously you have the spawn taunt of Sasquatch, right? So he's actually, I think, in the middle of the node or middle of the battle. So he's clearly taunting from the rest of them. And there are some characters with really high resistances that you might be familiar with actually from Incursion 2, which is Nova. He's very hard to land stuff on because of his charges. And then you also have Loki and Sylvie, which is interesting because they're gonna have raid mechanics. Like they're Bifrost, right? You're literally fighting other Bifrost members with your own Bifrost. So anything that you see in here as far as the characters go, they're gonna have raid buffs. Guardian and Sasquatch, who Alpha Flight's a raid team, Bifrost is a raid team, so all these characters are gonna have their raid stuff activated. And then on the second wave, you have more Nowhere characters with another Korg and a Thor Infinity War with Star-Lord Annihilator, and then another Loki and Sylvie combo, and then another North Star and Guardian depending on the order in which you kill the enemies, right? Like this could get worse as the node goes on, depending on the order that you cleared them, because obviously there's some synergy here with Nova and Korg, I guess, as well, with the rest of the Nowhere team down here. There's more Bifrost here, and there's even more Alpha Flight if some of these are still left up. So just a bit of an issue there, I think. This one, I don't believe is that hard at D0, but it is something that will become a pain at higher difficulty. So that's node number 1. Node number 2 is where you start to encounter more synergy, and you have Gladiator, Thanos Endgame. And this is on the first wave with Peter B. Parker, 2 Spider-Punks. Now, I know people are probably not as familiar with Spider-Punk anymore, but they were a raid team under Web Warriors, which also shares synergy with Ghost Spider. So the biggest thing I think is that Spider-Punk's ultimate does trauma. I'm pretty sure it does AoE trauma in raids only. So this is something that's going to happen there. And then you have Leader and Iron Patriot. So this one is going to be a bit rougher, obviously, because you're going to have the spawn taunt of Gladiator, but also keep in mind, while we have not had Thanos yet, as he's not playable, right? Like you cannot unlock him until Friday, and he is going to have that passive where if you knock him past 50%, he is going to clear all of your buffs, right? So this is brutal. Anything like Safeguard that you might have from Kid Loki is going to be out the window. All of your buffs are trashed. So this is huge problem. This is a huge problem, and especially at higher difficulties. I actually heard that this could wipe you. That the 50% nuke that basically Thanos does when he gets passed and when he gets pushed, goodbye, I guess, is what I heard at the higher difficulties. This could also be an issue at lower difficulties. And then, of course, on Wave 2, you have Gore the God Butcher, you have Spider Pav, and then you have Penny, another Ghost Spider, and Quicksilver just to top things off, because Quicksilver is a pain in the ass, like everywhere, just like Dark Dimension, if you've ever encountered him there. Sucks. But you do have that extra synergy of Gore. So depending on how many, again, who you clear and who you leave up, is going to add more synergy in Wave 2. So obviously, if Peter's not dead, and keep in mind, right, the Spider Society are a raid team. They're a raid team. So you're going to be going up against their raid buffs. So Penny can trauma in raids on her ultimate. So if you don't deal with Peter, this is going to be a huge problem on the second wave, but then you have Gore coming in, right? So there's a lot of problem characters on these nodes. And just by taking a look at these enemies, if you know anything about their kits, honestly, you could probably see how this can be a huge issue later on. So that's node number 2. The boss node here, we do, this is where things are going to get fun. So we have Gladiator, Gore, and Thanos all in the same wave. Great fun, right? You have now 3 characters, and you have also the passive, which is unlocked by Gladiator. So Gladiator's passive means that you cannot add exposed if you have exposed or vulnerability, actually, if you have 2 or more Annihilator allies. So Vol's special or basic will not apply until one of these Annihilators are dead. Also, he's going to have Spawn Taunt, Spawn Safeguard, and all of that. And then you have Void Knight, who's going to come in and he's going to ability block the entire team on the start. Now, you can sack this. We're going to talk about this. I have a little slide here about strategy and how it plays out, but it's kind of crazy. Cosmic Ghost Rider and Starbrand are here to start, and then you have there's a lot of AoE that's going on the first wave. And then the second, we have Lizard, Green Goblin Classic, Red Goblin, Nightcrawler, another duo of CGR and Starbrand, and another Void Knight who's going to come in and ability block you. So some crazy stuff here. Feel free to pause it if you want to just take a look at it again. But some of the strats anyways. So the battle starts off with Void Knight debuffing the Bifrost and ability blocking everyone with his ultimate. Sylvia is then ability blocked and cannot ult. She takes a turn and you basically have to basic. And then the enemy gladiator is the primary target because of the taunt, safeguard, and all of that stuff. AoE soon follow with all of these characters. Gore, Cosmic Ghost Rider, Lizard, who taunts again as well. Starbrand, Thanos, Gladiator, and Sunspot all do some variety of AoE or a primary and adjacent targets. It's just really brutal, and because Void Knight starts and brings them all together, and everyone just gets effed. There's a lot of damage that's being taken, and this is very hard to survive, even at D0 with maxed out Bifrost characters. So at a very minimum, I think sacking at least once or twice may be necessary on the boss note, or using Mephisto. So my thoughts were, from what I understand about Mephisto's kit, I think for raids, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to just bring him in here, and then he uses his pact right, and I think you could just use the basic, right? Which would just take out 50% of Gladiator's HP. And I was thinking if you did this twice, hypothetically anyways, especially at higher difficulties, you could just nuke Gladiator down. That was just my thoughts. And then you wouldn't have to deal with that part of the mechanics and the kits for the Annihilators after he's dead. Or maybe you might still be able to do it if you maybe just exhaust the first wave. That's possible too. And then you can just take the damage because I guess they're hitting a lot less harder, right? That's my thoughts. But without Mephisto, I think it's going to be tough. And at the higher difficulties, it could be impossible. But that's just what I've heard. Anyways, all right. And here we are to tech. So tech is the second section on the right side of the raid map, but it is the fourth section on the left side of the raid map. This is a bit of a reversal to what Mystic is. The overall difficulty, however, is not as bad as Bifrost in the Mystic section and is doable with an Incursion 2.3 kind of size Pegasus. So a G18 plus Kestrel and about 17 plus on the others. Now, keep in mind that obviously also Pegasus do not get the stat buffs. The upcoming Orchis team is going to be around the corner in a couple of weeks. So I wouldn't invest too hard into Pegasus at this point in time if you haven't already, but that's just my thoughts. Anyways, let's move on to the first node. And we do have 14 enemies here, and they're just, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but they're really using a lot of the same types of characters. You're seeing a lot of North Stars. So if I hadn't made this clear, North Star and his passive in raids with Alpha Flight basically blocks a lot of turn bar shenanigan stuff. Because you probably noticed when you use them offensively in raids. So North Star is going to block the on-spawn speed bar that Pegasus does get typically when they're in raids. So that's going to be really important, that the turn order is basically going to play out how it would normally. And I honestly don't know. North Star is probably going to go first. He's going to flip everyone, and then you're going to have to clear it with Rescue, I think, at that point, with all the negative status effects. And then you have a lot of the Cabal as well. They're showing up in a ton of nodes. So Leader, Iron Patriot here on wave 1. You have Doc Ock, Nemesis, Nobu for whatever reason. I guess applying counterattacks maybe. And then you have Lizard, or maybe just to burn the summon part. I don't know, because you have Kestrel, right? And then on wave number 2, you have another Leader. You have another Nemesis, another Lizard, another Iron Patriot, and then you have Black Cat and 2 Green Goblin Classics. This part could be particularly brutal if you do not control them well enough when the wave drop happens, and depending on what kind of synergy exists here, depending on your kill order, right? Because if you start stacking up synergies, this could be a small problem as well. But Pegasus and their kits do have a lot of good abilities. They also have a lot of good debuffs, right? They have a lot of stuns, they have traumas, so things that you should be able to deal with this unless you happen to start losing characters. But nonetheless, I think that overall is still going to be an easier experience than what the Bifrost is. Node number 2, this is 15 enemies with, hey, no surprise, but another North Star on wave number 1, this time with a Sasquatch. So you're going to be locked into fighting Sasquatch at the start, and then a whole lot of X-Men. Almost every single enemy is an X-Men at this point. We have Dazzler, Psylocke, 2 Kitty Prydes, Colossus, who is I forget what the new Colossus does. Does he taunt when other characters go under 50% if they're X-Men? I think so. Or when others get taunt, he gets taunt. I forget how it works, honestly. I remembered the Phoenix and Colossus interaction that I think that Colossus would taunt if an X-Men had taunt. I just forget 100%. But anyways, and then there's a Beast. And then wave number 2, you get another Kitty Pryde. So 3 kitties on the entire node. Another Psylocke. Psylocks are there just to chuck back your negative status effects if you don't deal with them fast enough. And also Dazzler, I think, can flip on X-Men, or at least unlimited X-Men, which I realize that there's like none of. But I think that's what she does. And then also Nightcrawler and Sunspot. And finally, to wrap it up, we have 2 Spider Weavers. So that's interesting. At this point in time, I think when you get to this, probably controlling them is a priority alongside Nightcrawler. But then you also have to be concerned about Psylocke. So unless you use the Ironheart special, which would apply trauma to those characters, there might be some issue of Psylocke chucking, any stuns back or anything like that. So something to be aware of. This is node number 2. And then finally, we have the boss node, which actually has less enemies. However, there's some pretty rough ones. On wave number 1, yes, there is an apocalypse. The boss node is Sasquatch, however, and he is the spawn taunt. So once again, another node with Sasquatch. And then you have Hank Pym, and then you have Spider-Woman, you have Peter B. Parker, Photon, and Ghost Rider Robbie in Apocalypse. So obviously that's going to be a big problem. I actually can't tell you if this Apocalypse is big. I'm assuming he's big Apocalypse, but I can't tell you that for sure. I don't know if he is. If he is, that's going to be an even bigger problem. If he's not, then he's going to lead in with the special, right? So that does matter. However, I'm not 100% sure to be able to tell you that here. On wave number 2, you also have a North Star, you have a Black Cat, you have a Penny Parker, a Pav, and a Captain Britain. That's fun too, right? Captain Britain, which could synergize with Hank Pym. So depending on who you leave up, honestly, like what I explained about in Bifrost in the Mystic section, I would probably, obviously try to make sure that Apocalypse doesn't stay up for too long. And then Peter, because you don't want that extra synergy, in my opinion, I think, with Penny and Pav. Otherwise, that's going to get out of control with the healing. So pretty interesting stuff, but it's going to be a nightmare on the Mystic section if I didn't make that clear. I think that's going to be the hardest. I think the tech section will be okay if you're prepared for that and you have them built. That's my understanding as how it's going to play out. And that's everything, everybody. So that's Boilon's Orchis raid video. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Hopefully this helps a little bit. I guess you can only prepare as much as like you have your characters built, right? And the reason why I focused on these 2 teams is because I just don't think that it's really going to matter too much on the other 3. However, I am concerned to the extent that Mephisto might be required, especially on the bosses, which is going to be the gatekeeper. Now, if you're somebody who has maxed out Bifrost, you might be able to just bash it down, possibly at low difficulties. At higher difficulties, it's going to be extremely difficult. You might need the whole effort of like your side of the team. So if you have like 3 or 4 people, I know that Void Knight, which is going to be on that boss node to start, I think because he's by himself and he's not with other Hive Mind characters, that if you were to sack it, I don't think he has enough energy to get back his ult right away. So I have this feeling that if you don't have Mephisto, you're probably going to have to go in there and sack all of those AoEs and then go back in with your Bifrost to make it a little bit easier. But that's going to be a lot harder on the higher difficulties. So just a little bit of a heads up for you guys. Hope that you enjoyed this video. And of course, there's going to be more videos on this channel in the days and weeks to come. Of course, there always is on Marvel Strike Force. So make sure that you hit that like, that subscribe, and ring that notification bell to get up to date with all things Marvel Strike Force here on the Boilon channel as soon as it becomes available. So that's it for now, everyone, and have a great weekend. Until next time, I'll see you. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll see y'all later. Boilon signing out.